Welcome to the Binge Breakers podcast. I'm Jacqueline. I am here to teach you how I overcame bulimia and my binge eating disorder, and how you can too. Through simple steps of mind management, repairing your relationship with yourself, understanding your habits, and intuitive eating.
Disclaimer. This recording is not intended to be utilized as medical advice or a medical diagnosis. If you think you're in need of medical attention or treatment, please seek it immediately. This recording will also contain sensitive subjects such as binging and purging, weight, and depression. Please listen at your own discretion and do what you think is best for you. Hello, guys. Welcome to the podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, and it's actually Seth Barner. Now, for those of you guys that have been listening for a long time, Seth was actually one of my very first few guests on the podcast. And he was on the podcast in September of 2020, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. But I brought him back on partly because I just enjoy talking with Seth. We always have really good conversations. We relate a lot to our experiences of binge eating and bulimia and that sort of thing. He has such good insight to share with everyone. But actually, after last year's podcast, he went into a tailspin of bulimia, and it was really hard on him, but he learned so much. I talked with him a lot throughout his journey. I've been in contact with him, and I think now that he feels like he's out of it and he has come full circle, he's learned tons more than he expected. And since I've been talking with him, I really wanted him to share his insight in the journey. So he's a lot to say. And I think some of you guys who are skeptical of intuitive eating or feel like you're trying a lot of things and that are online and they seem trendy, but they aren't working for you, I think you'll find his message comforting and helpful and a little bit of relief. And hopefully he can offer you another insight if everything that's mainstream isn't necessarily working for you. We bring up some skepticisms with intuitive eating and some like abstinence from certain food, which is kind of a taboo topic in eating disorder recovery. So if you feel like you're not ready to hear something like that, you can feel free to skip this episode, but I think it's very insightful. Take everything with a grain of salt, but what he's talking about, you might relate strongly to. So anyway, I'll let you guys listen to the episode. Otherwise, I went on vacation. I'll be posting lots of pics of Universal Studios on my Instagram, and I am sending out an email today with I think 7 lessons I learned from the vacation I just went on. But I think the biggest thing that I learned and had to relearn again was that one, it's really important to make time for rest because it just won't randomly happen. You have to plan for it, or you'll just keep staying in the spin of things. Another one is that when you step away from your actual life, you can see things more clearly than when you're in it. And then thirdly, don't obsess over food. It makes things worse. Allowing yourself to enjoy the food, like I did on vacation, is the best policy. And then maybe fourthly, what was the other lesson? I don't know. Having fun is good for the soul. It doesn't have to be so deep. Having fun was really helpful. We had such a good time, took so many photos, got to experience so much Harry Potter stuff. I'm such a nerd for Harry Potter, so I really enjoyed that. I got myself a mug that says Polyjuice Potion. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. You can take this long episode of Seth. I hope you guys enjoy it. I think it's a good one. And also keep an eye out because Seth is releasing a podcast soon, and the podcast will be called the Undivided Self Podcast. So, and that ties in nicely with the theme of this episode too. But look out for that. You can follow him on Instagram, and he announces that at the end of this episode. But he'll be creating a new Instagram and podcast soon, and it will be released. So look out for that. All right, bye guys.
Really long time.
That's amazing. I'm glad to hear that, Seth.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it. You were on the podcast last September, I believe. So it's been a full
Wow.
year since then. And you've been through a whirlwind. Well, cool beans. So let's not delay anymore. Then Let's just get it started. So
Perfect.
Seth, welcome to the podcast. And for people listening, Seth was actually on the podcast last year. And it was a very insightful episode. Definitely recommend listening to it. But I brought him back on because a lot has happened to him in the past year.
Yeah.
And so Seth, let's just get it started. What has been going on for you in general?
Okay. So I'd say since, I guess it was last September that I was on the podcast, my kind of insight was more so around binge eating. I was coaching on binge eating, and then ironically, I don't know if discover is the right word, but I discovered maybe bulimia. And that kind of reignited the entire path of the binge eating, except I would say it was on a different level this time. It's like it came back with a vengeance, because there was this irrationality of, well, I can just get rid of it. So I'm sure anybody listening to this has had that mindset before. It's like, well, I can, and not only that, but for me, because I've had so many digestive issues, it was like, oh, this is a great way I can mitigate those digestive issues that I had with binge eating. And it's like I would really say it went from a really bad habit to what I would consider an addiction for me. And so I kind of found myself kind of had this identity crisis, because here I was as a coach, helping people with binge eating. And now I'm struggling even harder than I ever have before with this now. And so
it's an awful feeling.
Yeah. So it's been an on and off thing. But I will say it's been now being off. And I would say, nobody knows the future 100%, but at a level now where I feel like I've never felt better than I have. And I feel like it brought me through some of the lowest points that I've ever been through. But because of that, I've gained not only insight about myself, but just insight, I think, on how and why so many people struggle with this. And it's just, so I like to kind of normalize it, because I don't think it's not normalized bulimia, but just, I guess I've learned that it's much more common of a thing than I once thought for a lot of people. But for me specifically, it's definitely something that I can see why it happened. And now looking back, I can see just the nuances that I couldn't see before because of what I have been through.
Yeah. And if I could say something real quick, what you said about normalizing that, I'm not sure exactly, I think you're referring to other things, but also normalizing the fact that coaches and people in positions of giving information out have things going on behind the scenes. And I just talked to someone yesterday who they've been in their profession for 30 years and they're struggling with binging. It's not uncommon. And we've talked about this a lot too, but I feel like it's wrong to think that can hinder you as a coach. I feel like you being someone who it's so fresh in your mind is one of the best people to help someone with binging, because you get it. You get it. You're in it, or you were in it recently. It's it's a good thing in a way, even though it's obviously painful and you wouldn't have wished that on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to say it, is normalizing the fact that, especially in the social media age, it's so easy to portray something because you have knowledge about something, and then kind of hide, even unintentionally, behind the scenes of what you're actually going through. But I think going through that, and this is very evident in your content, which is what I love, is that there's a language almost with binge eating or bulimia or eating disorders in general, that you can tell if somebody's been through it. You can tell the thoughts that they've had. Sometimes you can tell in their content, or just the way they speak about it, that they've had experience with this, and it's not just something that they learned in a classroom. And I think that's invaluable. But I think it's the idea that, coaches can't struggle, or that, that they're beyond human, essentially, is definitely something that is not true.
Yeah. And no one when you see people like that act as though and this is getting off topic, but they act as though they don't have any problems and they're completely perfect. It's very unrelatable. And you're kind of I don't think you get it. So I don't think you can help me, because I am not you in any shape or form.
Yes, absolutely. That, and then also that I think what goes along with that is this idea that, oh, well, this person, or that somebody portraying the idea that, hey, I found this and this works for me, so if it doesn't work for you, there's something wrong with you, or you just need to get on my wavelength. And that's what I've realized, is this is a very individual thing.
Yeah. And that's kind of a good segue of what I wanted to ask you. And if you want to talk about something else, please let me know. But you were kind of in that boat of struggling with bulimia, struggling with binging, and then feeling like what's wrong with me? I keep doing what people are trying to tell me to do and it's not working. So could you tell us about that?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a very big push. I guess I would say, first of all, having come full circle now, I think we often, and I know I have, maybe found the solution at some points or found what worked for us, but like second guessed it because it's not what we saw worked for somebody else. And so I think, well, for me, intuitive eating did not work well. I think, and maybe there's like, I feel like there's somewhat of an intuitive knowing when you take a step back and you look at what has worked for you and what hasn't in the past, and saying, well, what, and there's kind of like a, I don't know if it's maybe your conscience or how to say it, but anyway, so I'd say I looked at intuitive eating. I tried, mindfulness. I could have the head knowledge about every tactic, every strategy out there. But for me, what I found is the more things I quote unquote tried, the more confused I got, the more in my own head I got. I'm a very deep thinker, and that can be a good thing. But with binge eating or bulimia, where you feel like you are two people, essentially, it can be a really bad thing because you're constantly at conflict with yourself. It's like, well, one day one day it's abstinence, and the next day it's intuitive eating, and the next day it's this, and I would keep having these like epiphanies where I'm like, oh, I figured this out. This is what I need to do. And because it made sense logically, but the thing is bulimia is not a logical thing. It's a very impulsive, very compulsive thing that it's almost like sidesteps that logical side of you. You can be logical when you're, away from the food, when you're not having an urge or going through all that. But I think the more that I found that maybe these things could work for me if I wanted to spend a lot more time and effort and going in circles for a lot more, like, if you push something hard enough for long enough, you can make it work, but at what expense? And for me, when I stepped back and I thought, I need to find the most efficient, the easiest route mentally for me, rather than trying to do, I guess, what other people were doing and following the narrative that was working for other people. I'm totally happy that it worked for them. But I also had to step back and realize, like, hey, maybe like this doesn't work for me because the way I process things is different than somebody else is processing that. And everybody's individual experiences, the thoughts that they've had, the way that they process things, that's such a big thing with any kind of recovery. And I think so knowing yourself and thinking back to the way that you think and what has worked for you, at least for me, that was a huge, huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that was a beautiful way you said that. Choosing what works for you mentally, and the fact that process, you get to know yourself so much better. And confusion is a huge thing that when I talk with people all the time, the biggest thing that trips them up, they had a plan, they're going to do it, but then they start overthinking and thinking this way and going back and forth. And then they don't even know what they're doing, even though it's very simple in some ways what to do. They get in their head and they try all these different methods coming at them. And then they just, of course, it's like a binge or completely throw in the towel, whatever. So that happens a lot to people. I'm glad that you brought that up. But also, I love that you said, like, trying what works best for you, the easiest way for you. I think that's true on so many levels too, because what you're doing now, maybe that won't be the case in a year from now. Maybe you'll need to switch it up because there's something easier for you to do then as well. Like, I don't eat the same way I ate when I recovered. It's completely different. I mean, there's still like a lot of principles there, but it's different. So I think that it's good to point out that it's just better to do what's simplest and easiest always, and then baby step from there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right on the mark and so well said. And I think one part of this whole recovery, I guess, for the past year, part of it, I know I reached out to you and we worked together for a little bit, and that was extremely helpful. And one thing that was very insightful is you would ask me, basically what was working for me, or you were very open to helping me come to that conclusion myself versus like pushing what worked for you onto me. It was the complete opposite. It was like helping me find that clarity. And I think that is the power to me of working with somebody that has been there, but also it's not necessarily them pushing what worked for them onto you, but helping you come to those conclusions yourself. Because for me, what I kept realizing, I would tell you like, hey, this worked for me. And, so you said, well, what's stopping you from continuing to do that? And like that question for me was kind of a light bulb moment, because it was like, well, why am I not doing this? And it was, well, really when it came down to it, was because I thought that I was somewhat lesser, or that I didn't have control of my own mind. That was a big thing for me, was this struggle for like, because I couldn't quote unquote moderate certain foods, or maybe I could, but it would take every ounce of willpower and energy that I had. Yeah, exactly. And so I kept spinning in circles trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, as they say. And finding that moment of clarity of just finding what worked for me was huge.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, first of all, that I like when you reflect on the questions that I asked, I was like, oh, I asked the right question. Cool. But but it is like a lot of coaching is just asking questions to help people find their own answers. And I think as me as a coach, and you probably too, you do a little bit of both. You aren't just like, I'm going to give you no help, but I'm not going to give you no answers,
right?
And whatnot. You talk and consult, but then also you need to ask them questions, because a lot of the answers are in your own brain, and you know you best. So when you ask people, instead of just preaching to them, it helps them come to their own conclusions, as you say. And that feels a lot better to me too. When I'm trying to work through something, I'm much more likely to do it if I've come to my own conclusion about it, instead of just listening to someone talk about it, which is why discussing it on your own, or like journaling, or any way to formulate your own thoughts, is really important.
Yeah, totally. And I think just being able to, there's something about verbalizing your thoughts that it's like it puts them out in front of you, so you can actually see what you're thinking, and you can really kind of evaluate those thoughts at a greater level. And also having that feedback from somebody that I would say, I don't know how to phrase this, but maybe it's in a normal state of mind. And I would say that when you're in binge eating or bulimia, you're in a distorted state of mind. So it's kind of like when it's like I've heard it said, when you're in the picture, you can't see the frame. And it's it's like when you're so caught in something, like you can't, and you're so caught up in a habit that you repeated every single day, that your brain is like, it's like when your previous podcast was great at talking about this, but like when you're drunk, you're not in your state, like a normal state of mind. So it's like when you look back, you're like, why did I make that decision? It's like, well, I wasn't in a normal state of mind. And for me, taking a step back and realizing I wasn't in a normal state of mind, waking up every day, like having, these urges to just eat all the food at any time, that's not normal. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me, but it means that I've developed this abnormal state of mind over time. And so for me, I had to realize that I needed to kind of get my biology, my neurochemistry, like back to a normal state, to actually be in a position to make informed decisions on a regular, consistent basis, without second guessing myself.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it too. It's not that it's bad, but it isn't necessarily normal. And normal, when people say that, they get kind of like upset, because it's like, oh, well, what is normal? And like, sure, yeah, there's so many different variations, but it's definitely odd to like be waking up. You're not only in a hangover phase from the binge and purge that's going on, so that's just completely effed, but then you have this constant drive going on. So you're not necessarily thinking the clearest that you ever would be, or at the very least, you're not thinking about the way someone who doesn't have an eating disorder is thinking. So,
yeah.
But how did you kind of take the steps to get your neurochemistry and biology back into place? And I know obviously maybe things aren't perfect still or whatever, but how did you take that step?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for me was realizing that I needed to get out of my own head. And when I thought back in the past, the only thing that can I think that can truly get us out of our own head is taking action with, and this was key for me, is taking it with trust. Because when you trust something, you kind of step outside of your own head and you say, you know what, like everything in my body doesn't want to do this right now. For me, this was taking a break from all the foods that I would binge on, and not only taking a break from those foods, but taking a break from the entire thought process. I've heard someone say that it's kind of like boarding a train, and it's like the second and you've talked about this before with like the roller coaster analogy, which is great, because there's a point at which you start going down that path, and it's almost like your brain is locked in to, well, you know, maybe you're not binging yet, but it's only a matter of time, and you're kind of already set on that. So for me, I had to take a step back further from that, and think about what triggers are actually, or what things do I do that I'm really only doing because they're eventually going to lead to binging. So for me, that was going to the grocery store like every single day of the week. Like I didn't need something from the grocery store every single day of the week. I could buy stuff in bulk, but I knew that a part of me only wanted to go there because I was going to binge. And the repeated loop, and that I know I helped process with you, was I would tell myself, I need to go prove to myself that I'm going to have these foods in moderation. And so I'd start to have in moderation, and then I realized, and then again, I would switch methods like in that moment, which was like, well, you know what, like maybe abstinence is the solution. So tomorrow I'll start abstinence. Like tomorrow I'll start this. And so whatever got me to binge in that moment, that was the thing. And I know that's illogical, and like saying it now, it's illogical, but when you're in that moment, that that prefrontal cortex part kind of shuts down almost, so to speak, and you're not thinking clearly, because you've trained that primal part of your brain to be so much stronger than your rational brain. And so for me, when I thought about it, I think when it was deciding to take a break from those foods and trusting that and not only taking a break, but focusing on other things at the same time I was taking that break. Because if you take a break from something and all you're thinking about is what you're not having, well, as soon as you stop that break, you're going to go right back to the same habits. But I think every day I would wake up and I would either journal, or I would really just pay attention to what was changing in my mind as I was taking this break from things. And it was like every single day I got a little bit more mental clarity. And the more distance I got from those foods, the more I was able to see them for what they were. And I think before we talked about like, well, what is normal? Well, for me, I realized that normal was being able to evaluate consequences and whether something is worth it or not with a sound mind. Because when I think about my relationship with alcohol, which I've never had a problem with, probably because I just don't drink very often. But, you know, I'm sure if I, you know, had 2 or 3 glasses of wine every day, I could develop that problem. But I just never had an issue with it. So I feel very, like if I decide to have a drink, I feel very clear about it because it's not something I have often. And I can very much evaluate like, hey, is this worth it or not? And ironically, the less that I have it, the less often it becomes worth it for me. And so I found this exact same to be true with like those processed foods, that, you know, hey, I could have this, but once you've gotten enough distance, you start to feel so good, like that almost becomes a positive addiction. And it's like, I can see it when you're in the throes of binge eating, or when you're in the throes of bulimia, it can feel like you're restricting yourself because you're not having something, even if it's just for a period of time, because your brain is so hooked on it. But then once your brain gets away from that and you have clarity and you feel so good, it's like that in itself almost becomes an addiction, like a positive addiction. And you don't want to mess that up. I'm not saying you can never have those things, but it just, your sense of worth it changes from doing that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of like for me too, I have to be like a little bit careful with alcohol. So the less often I have it, the less I have a desire for it, unless I'm kind of like, it could be fun, but like, do I really want to do that right now? I don't feel as good when I have it, that sort of stuff. And I like that you said like, it's not like you'll never have it, but over time, it becomes this thing where it's just much better to keep on going with the habits that you're in. I find the same case for a lot of people, that they stop binging, and at first it's really, really awful and hard and difficult. But as you said, you know, as you get further away from it, each day gets a little bit easier, a little bit more clarity, and then it becomes less and less worth it to go back to it, even if it's appealing. And for me, like, I'll still experience urges sometimes, but I've just gotten so much distance from it. I'm like, no freaking way are we going back to that. It is certainly not worth it. Like, because even if you could just do it one time, like, which it never is, that's opening Pandora's box. So you just don't want to go into it. There was, I should have taken more notes when you're talking, because there's a lot of good stuff you said there. Oh, the alcohol thing too. I remember that conversation, and I used that conversation a lot in examples with other clients that we had about alcohol, because I was like, it's brilliant. And for those of you guys listening, I think Seth is brilliant. So like, definitely good conversations are all around. But if you could think about something that you have a healthy, moderate relationship with, and then compare it to how you're eating food, or you can try to use that as a model example. I think that's so good. That's kind of what you did with alcohol, a little bit of being like, okay, with alcohol, I can have it in moderation. I can have it sometimes. It's not a big deal. But with food, it's like all or nothing, or this thing where you feel like you're restricting if you don't have it. So seeing it the way you see alcohol was really helpful to you. And I think that's a good thing to bring up.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. And ironically, for me, I found I resonated more with, I actually read a lot of like quit lit for alcohol, because I found that for me, that resonated more than it did with food, because I felt the same way with bulimia as people did with having a drinking issue. So like, I mean, it was almost, it lined up in a lot of ways for me. I know you can't just quit food, but I think
yeah,
for a period of time, you can quit, you know, the foods that are triggering. You know, it's not like you're trying to stop eating broccoli, unless it's, you know, it's like a volume thing or something like that.
Right.
But I think, yeah, comparing something that like when I thought about alcohol and my relationship with it, I also thought about how often do I even think about alcohol? Like, how often do I wake up and the first thought in my head is like, I need to get some alcohol. And it's like, never. And so I thought about that, and I thought, well, why is that? And I even thought about the first food that I ever binged on was peanut butter. And it was like 12 years ago in college. But I thought about it, and I haven't bought peanut butter, or almond butter or whatever it is, for a long time. And it's not like I'm thinking every single day, like, oh, well, why didn't I, you know, I need to let myself have this. It's like, literally, it doesn't even cross my mind. Or I thought about like video games before, like when I was in high school, I played a lot of video games. It wasn't an addiction or anything like that. But I just decided to not buy them at one point, because I knew they were going to distract me from the things I wanted to do. And I think about it now, and it's like, it doesn't cross my mind. If it comes up, I'll play it. I'll have a drink every now and then. But comparing that to how often you're thinking about something, and my favorite analogy that you've had is just the breaking up with bulimia, because like you said, when you break up with somebody, you're not like calling them every day and be like, hey, just wanted to chat. I know we're like, you know, we're broken up, but just wanted to chat and have to talk about a few things. You kind of get that distance from them, and you start to build a new life outside of it. And then when if you see that person again, it's like a casual hello. But I've heard somebody say this about alcohol, about making it small and irrelevant in your life. And it's like, when your new normal becomes your life, like your actual life, the things you want to do, the things you're pursuing, the goals that you're chasing, those foods that were once everything become, you know, a passing thought, or something that comes up every once in a while, but it's not all consuming. It's just a completely different relationship.
Yeah, your life gets, and I like what you said also in the beginning too, of when you're stopping those things, you're including other stuff in your life too, and making those things bigger and bigger. And then those things, they just really get wrestled out and just pushed out, you know, because there's just no more room for them and no more room for them. And they become irrelevant, small and irrelevant, like you're saying. It's true.
Yeah.
And And also there's like gardeners outside. So if you hear like random loud noises and I suddenly go on mute, that's why. But so sorry everyone listening as well. But I wanted to ask you, you said something interesting too about like you're not in a rational state of mind, so taking action quickly. How did you, and then also recognizing kind of the telltale signs that you were binging, like the things that you would do that totally led to binging, there was nothing else. So how did you just stop doing that, or like get yourself to pause that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It didn't happen on the first try. So I will say, yeah, I wish, right? Like we all wish it could happen on the first try. For most people, it doesn't. But I think for me, it was putting my foot down. I think the way I could articulate with myself, it was kind of, I finally stepped back at one point and I thought, you know what? I feel like I have two different minds within me right now. I feel like there's a part of me that just wants to binge and purge for the rest of my life, and sacrifice everything, just to do that. And there's a part of me that has hopes and dreams and goals, and that part of me feels like it's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and I've become much more efficient at listening to that other part of me. And so I thought, you know what, and again, this is something I read in like a quizlet with alcohol, is she said I wanted to have one version of myself. And so I realized I was like, right now, it's very binary. I have like this very strong part of me that wants to binge and purge, and I have this other part of me that is rational, but that part is not, it's not getting that much attention. So I thought, I need to fully remove myself as much as I can from any thought, or you can't stop thoughts from coming sometimes, but you can decide, the further ahead you can decide to handle them, and what you're going to do about them, I think the easier it is. So for me, it was,
you can react to them differently. You can,
yeah,
they can come up, but you can disengage. You have the choice there.
Absolutely. And one of the big things for me was I needed to cut off the fight with that other version of myself. So a phrase that I kept repeating in my head a lot was, don't even consider. It's like, it's not even an option. And because the second that I would start to consider, well, maybe let's just try to moderate. Let's just, you read this on somebody's Instagram post. So let's just try this mindset today. You don't really need to do this. Like you can actually moderate. Like you just need to go prove it to yourself now. That would always, because it's like we know ourselves so well. We know what thoughts will work. And so I had to step away from that and say, you know what, maybe that will work. Maybe I could moderate, like maybe I could do this, but right now I've committed to taking a break from these foods. And I'm just going to trust that all these crazy thoughts I'm having right now, over time, I'm going to be able to look back on them with more clarity. And for me, that first aim was 30 days. And it was that 30 days with the mindset of, hey, if I mess up, like, that's okay. I'm just going to get right. Like my aim is for that 30 days. So I'm not going to beat myself up if it happens. One thing I started to tell myself was like, of course you messed up. Like this is, look how long you've been doing this. Like, it's not, I heard someone say one time, like, it's not a mystery why people do drugs. It's a mystery why not all of us are doing drugs all the time.
Right. Yeah. That's so good that you said that. Like people, it's like being shocked when someone cuts you off in traffic. It's like, oh my God, how could they? And it's like, well, of course they did, of course
Right.
that happened.
Right. So I think just not being surprised about that, and just having grace with myself and saying, you know what, like, but also on the flip side of that, every day that I made a step forward, it was like, hey, I just took, I put a brick in the wall of building a new mindset today. And it wasn't, I would also get this anxiety about, well, okay, well, what about after the 30 days? What are you gonna do? What if you relapse? What if you go back to this? What if you go back to that? And it's like, that thought was very pesky, and that would happen over and over. And it was like, well, what am I going to do at that point? But that's when I had to trust that I would be in a different mindset a month from now, having done this, and it was like, okay, well, I'm just going to reserve my decision making until that time, until I'm at a clear state of mind, and then I can decide what I want to do next, or what I want to do moving forward. And for me, that was a really hard thing to get a hold of. That's what kept tripping me up, was that anxiety about the future. But when I just decided to put all those thoughts on reserve, and what this looked like in action, by the way, is it wasn't never going to the grocery store, but it was just being like, when I went to the grocery store, I went in, I got what I wanted. I didn't linger down the aisles with the things that I would usually binge on. I thought about how many times I left our apartment to quote unquote go for a drive and just listen to a podcast. And I knew where that always led. And so I thought, is this associated in any way with what I used to do? And if it was, I didn't even open that box. And the more that I did that, the easier it became. And the more I could look back on those habits and those thoughts, and the more I could be mindful. It was like all the things with intuitive eating and being mindful became easier as I got some distance from those foods and from the way that they were affecting my mind.
Yeah. You just needed like a full-on break from it. And the way you articulated that was really good. Like finding out what was associated with it and just not even engaging. I love that the thought of don't even consider. That's just because like the moment you start to negotiate and the moment you start to like have a conversation, it's kind of, this is maybe a bad analogy or a mean analogy, but it's kind of like someone who is just like a little bit crazy, on the street. And like, it's not that you don't wish them ill, but you're not going to necessarily engage, because the second that you talk, like a salesman or something, the second you talk to them, they know that they're there, and they're going to keep on talking and keep on trying to convince you until you either say something with like even more immense effort, because then you're in the situation now. You have to deny them in some sort of way, or you give in. So that's like the only two. You're forced into a corner. If you don't engage, you're kind of watching on the outside while you're watching some poor other sucker talking to this person. So that's a really good example and thing to say. And then something else you said, which is like trust with action and trusting the future. I always do that to myself too, but you always think, what am I going to do in 30 days? I do that all the time with like business stuff and like my future. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And it's like, no, this is working now. And whenever you're questioning that, a lot of people do the same thing as you, where it's like, what am I going to do in 30 days? How is this going to upkeep? Whatever. It's almost like you're not trusting yourself, right? It's this lack of trust in yourself to be able to make a rational decision, to be able to make good decisions. And I don't know why we do that, because we're pretty like, you know how to be an adult, and get up and make decisions for yourself. But then our brain just likes to panic. So I like that you call that out as a big worry for you, and you were able to kind of just disengage from it, or try to be like, it doesn't matter. Something I do for that too, especially if I'm thinking about like some project or something, and I'm like, I can't even fathom how I'm going to do this and plan it out. I just try to take it like, what do I need to do today? And that seems to help calm that worry and anxiety down.
Yes, that's such a key. Is it's why I understand why Alcoholics Anonymous or different people say just worry about today. Like, I'm just going to follow through with this today. But part of that for me, like I said, was always trusting that I would be in a little bit clearer of a state of mind like tomorrow. And I think about it the way, again, back to alcohol, for me, if I have, well, at this age, if I have like 2 drinks, I pretty much have a hangover the next day. But I'm not thinking like, what is wrong with me the next day? Like, I know that I'm going to feel like shit for a while, and I have to kind of let that pass. And so I'm not surprised by it. I just, but I also know that I'm going to feel better. And it's like, hey, it's going to be easier to make good choices tomorrow after this hangover kind of wears off. And I think maybe it's not a literal hangover, but I think, and I've looked at this from a neurochemical level, and there's studies and evidence to back this up, the way dopamine down regulates in your brain. So I also kind of knowing that like, hey, this is actually normal. Like, if somebody else was to take the exact same actions I have over the past year or the past 10, 12 years, like they would be experiencing the same things I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of going that way. And also one thing I meant to mention earlier was this idea of one thought that would creep in my head a lot when I was going through this was like, you're restricting yourself. And so what I decided to flip that, and I would say, well, actually having those foods all the time in the amount that I was having them was actually restricting my life. Like it was restricting the things that I wanted to do, the things that I wanted the most, which is why I didn't want to just keep doing it. Because if it wasn't restricting my life in some way, if you could binge and purge with zero consequences, I mean, I'm pretty sure we'd all be doing it, right? But it's the consequences that are the problem. And so when I thought, no, actually my life is being restricted right now, so I need to change that first before I can reintroduce these foods to a level where they're not restricting my life anymore, where they're adding to my life. You know, for example, if, when I have, again, continually going back to alcohol, if I have a drink, maybe it's probably going to be at like a rare occasion where like maybe somebody makes an old fashioned that that's just out of this world, and I'm on a trip or something like that. It's a special occasion, but it also plays into the experience. And so I thought about that. I'm like, how many things do I indulge in because it's part of the experience? It's not the experience itself. So kind of taking a step back and flipping that mindset on its head was really helpful for me.
Yeah, that is important, because I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm sure a lot of people listening, especially if you're in the eating disorder recovery realm, a lot of people would hear what you said and be like, oh, taking away all foods. Like, no, there's a huge, obviously, population, as you know, that thinks, no, you just need to give in to every craving, desire, and urge, and that will eventually fix the problem. And I don't think that's true. And I myself, I didn't have ice cream in the house. I didn't have cakes or things that were really bingeable for me. I had some stuff, and I tried to like eat intuitively, but I did remove some of those foods that were just really so tempting for me at the time, and I eventually reintroduced them. But I remember it was a while before I got myself like an actual container of peanut butter, or something that was more than a pint of ice cream. And you're really like scared to do it and reintroduce it. And when you do, you're kind of like, oh my God, I can handle it. But it takes time. So removing those things, like you said, maybe it's restricting the food, but it's also restricting your life every time you have that. And honestly, and this is going to be maybe controversial because it sounds like such a diet thing, but if we had to go without ice cream for the rest of our life, it would be a-okay, right? Like ice cream does not equal happiness. And like you said, food on a special occasion, stuff like that, it's more about the experience of the food itself. It's not that big of a deal. And I'd rather, like you said, live a life that's very full than have all the Oreos in the world. Just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's right on. And I think I just lost my train of thought here. Oh yeah, it's like
I
you
do
said,
it all the
time. But the idea of if someone told you couldn't have ice cream ever again, like you'd probably be pretty disappointed, but you wouldn't feel like your life just ended. And when you're in like the midst of bulimia, it kind of feels like that. So it's totally different when somebody that is through their eating disorder or has enough time and distance from it. And that is, to me, that is one of the key factors. It's the most unsexy thing, but just time. Like things take time. You have to time and repetition. It took time to get here. It's going to take time to get out of it. But if you think about somebody that's telling you to have everything in moderation from a point of not being in the midst of an eating disorder, well, for them, that's a completely different vantage point than you having everything in moderation, or you intuitive eating when you're in the middle of this, what I would say, like kind of a faulty brain wiring that has been acquired over time. So it's just, the context is so key. So it's like you said, you can be just focused on today. It's like somebody that I used to run a long time ago, and it'd be like somebody that has run 10 marathons telling me like, hey, you just need to you just stick with your training plan, and you just need to you need to hit these 6-minute mile splits, and you'll be on pace. Like, that's great. Yeah, but I just started running a mile like 3 days ago, So, but you also trust that, you know what, maybe I'll have that person's vantage point down the road, but right now, like, I'm just trying to get to running 2 miles at a 12-minute pace, or something like that. But you know that if you keep doing it, if you stick with the process, like, you will get stronger. And it's the same with your mind. Like, you will get stronger over time if you trust that those changes will take place, and you focus on the things that are new. And sometimes that's scary. Like, for me, I would start to have this kind of fear of, or not fear, but this maybe anxiety about the things that I haven't been doing. And I would have to flip that and say, you know what, like, I haven't been doing those things because I've been stuck in this habit and this addiction. And I just, like, even if I did nothing today, but follow through with what I said I was going to do for eating, like, I took a huge step forward today towards those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's huge. And so many people spend time with that of like, oh my God, I haven't been doing enough. I've lost all this time, or that sort of stuff. And it's not helpful because you're in it. Doesn't even matter. Like, you can't take back the time. You can't change it. And it's better to just recognize the progress that you're making right now. And it's so hard to believe for people out there listening, but the bulimia, the disorder you're going through, it does make you stronger in a way on the other side. Like, you know how to deal with something that no one else has had to, not a lot of people have had to deal with. You've gone through the experience. I heard this from someone else, and I'm forgetting who, but you've gone through the experience of having to completely rewire your brain and change your habits. And you went through excruciating discomfort of changing that habitual thing that you did all the time, every single day. Not a lot of other people have had an experience like that. They don't have to. They just, like, are going about their normal daily lives, which is fine. But to change something so ingrained really changes you, and in a better way. I think the skill that you learn in bulimia recovery and binge eating disorder recovery is so transferable to a lot of stuff. So even if it doesn't feel like a huge progress or a huge accomplishment to not binge one day, and you're like, oh, good for you, very sarcastically, it actually is gigantic, and it can help you with so many other things in life. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I was going to ask you, since well, actually, let me check my notes real quick. There was one other thing I want to tell you, but it's gone now as well. But I wanted to ask you basically to wrap things up a little bit, if someone out there is struggling with bulimia, what would you say to them, given all the things we just said?
Yeah, so I did think of what I was going to say before, tailing off of what you said, and it kind of parlays into this as well, which is one of my favorite quotes is, the greater the struggle, the greater the victory. And I think that when you've been through a struggle like that, and this is even on a neurochemical level as well, where when your brain is used to getting those extremely high hits of pleasure, it kind of downregulates so that you don't get as much enjoyment out of simple things like, just time with your partner, or like being with friends, or just like, a sunset, the things that just normal things that people get enjoyment out of. You don't get that same enjoyment because your pleasure centers are so off kilter. And so when you get that back, it's like those things are 10 times more enjoyable, and you embrace those little things so much more. And it's cheesy to say, but like, life is more beautiful because you've seen that, and because you've been to that struggle, and now you're on the other side of it with that mental clarity. But I would say, with anybody that's going through bulimia right now, or binge eating, or whatever it is, I think the first thing is to have some grace for yourself and realize that because of repetition and because of time, it's normal to feel sometimes out of control, or to feel frustrated with yourself. Like, that's totally normal. And if you're not feeling like that, like, allow yourself to. And I would say the second thing, like, allow yourself to, normalize, or not normalize, but to not be surprised by the fact that you did a habit that you've done almost every single day for years, or however long. And I would say, try different things out, but I would say try them with the mindset that accompanies them. So if I was to just tell somebody, oh, you just need to stop eating, these foods for 30 days and you'll be good. It's not just that, it's you need to, and again, this is what worked for me, but whether it's intuitive eating or whatever you think resonates with you, give it a try, but go all in when you give it a try, and allow your mindset to change with it. So it's not just, hey, I'm giving up these things, but I'm also, that doesn't mean I'm going to the grocery store every day, looking longingly at the ice cream and being like, oh, I'm not having this today, and just like shaking my fist. I'm trying to focus on other things and realize that. And I think the biggest thing is having that growth mindset, like you said, like where you are now, I think 3 years later, completely different mindset than you were when you first started. But it takes time, and just realize that every single day that you practice that new mindset, like it's not going to come naturally. It has to be not forced, but it has to be intentional. And so I think one thing that helps with that is having guidance from somebody else that has been there where you're at, and they can kind of remind you that, hey, like, I know what you're going through right now. I know it feels like everything in you wants to do this, or everything in you wants to go back to your old ways. But if you just trust me, like, metaphorically, like, hold my hand and just stick with it. And I promise you, like, you're going to be in a different mindset 30 days from now, or maybe it takes more than 30 days. Like, it's not going to be an overnight recovery. Maybe it takes a year, but it's not like you spend that whole year and everything sucks, and then on the 366th day, like, everything's better. It's like, no, you get a little bit better throughout the entire process. And so, and that's part of what is engaging about going through a process, is that you get better and you grow stronger as you go through it. And so 3 months from now, you'll be in a different headspace. Maybe you're not 100% recovered, but you're in a different headspace, and recovery becomes more clear, and you're able to look back with more clarity to find what works for you. But I think that big thing is, like, having somebody that has guidance, that has been there and can help pull you through, walk through the minefield ahead of you, so you don't step on them, essentially. But also forgiving yourself in the process. So, for example, with what worked for me, if I went 4 days and then I binge and purge, and I'm like, okay, well, that's 4 days. I'm still gonna keep shooting for 30, and then maybe the next time I hit 15, and maybe I go, binge and purge again. And it's allowing yourself to have those road bumps and realizing, like, you can either see that as, oh man, I messed up, I'm like back at square one, or you can see that as, like, holy shit, like, I just went 15 days without doing this, or I went 3 days without doing this, something that is extremely hard to do. And yeah, okay, I messed up, of course, no big deal. But then it's where you put your aim. Your aim is whatever target you set for yourself, and just having that aim, even if you don't hit it, having the aim can produce positive emotion to continue to help you move forward to new things. And just even having the curiosity of, like, what will my life be like when this is no longer an issue for me? Like, just having that curiosity is something to look forward to in itself. So, long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, it was a great answer. There's so much value packed in this episode. I agree that looking forward to, it's a good question of, well, who will I be if I am not struggling with bulimia, is a big question. And for a lot of people, what they think they'll be like is actually doesn't even scrape the surface of what they're actually going to be like. And there's so much you learn along the way, and it's really, really amazing. And looking forward to recovery from an excitement base, I've been talking about this a lot in my course too, and the Facebook Lives, is that you need to drive yourself from kind of love and excitement versus fear. A lot of people try to recover from this place of, like, well, you're, damaging your body and you could die and all this sort of stuff. And that just makes you more stressed out, and you already know it. And it doesn't seem to, I think they did a study with smokers actually, where that, like, those ads where it's like thinking about how your lungs are changing over time, like, that doesn't help. But, like, maybe ads where it's like, it's not cool to smoke is actually more effective, which is silly. But yeah, I agree, driving from excitement. And there's so many good things you say, but I should have taken more notes. But I think that this episode, we could talk all day about it, has been amazing. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything. I do think out there, people listening, they're going to find this episode quite comforting, because they're going to be like, okay, maybe I just need to go all in on one thing. Maybe I just need to try some things. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is, maybe it's okay that while I'm covering right now, I don't feel amazing, because you're not necessarily supposed to be amazing. Something you said where it's like the process actually doesn't feel super good. It gets better over time. But when you have all that, your dopamine's downregulated, you have all those things going on, there is that void that happens that it just feels like normal things aren't fun for you anymore. But that seeing you and being like, it actually does go away is just more renewed hope for people. So thank you for sharing that. But anyway, where can people find you at?
So I am on Instagram at my full name and middle initial. It's just Seth A. Barner. I'm actually going to be starting a new Instagram fairly soon. And pretty soon starting a podcast in the next month or so here. So inspired by you. So thank you for that.
Awesome. When will that, because this episode will be out later. So when do you think that's going to be out?
I'd say beginning of November, first episode. And one quick thing I wanted to say to kind of tail off what you said before is that and you talked about this on a podcast before, it's like, when are you recovered? It's like, you can be recovered right now. You can identify yourself as a recovered person. And then every single day that you follow through with what you said you were going to do, that you go all in, instead of having one foot in, one foot out, every single day that you go all in and do that, you can see that as evidence that you are recovered, that you're a recovered person, and you're hitting some road bumps along the way, but you're still going up, like, no matter what. So having that as evidence, I think, is a huge thing. But thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
I know, yeah. We always enjoy conversations together. I feel like we can always talk. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it'd be useful. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Hey, if you like this episode, you have to come check out the Binge Breakers Recovery course. If you're trying to recover from bulimia and you're sick of doing it alone and you feel like you've tried a lot of traditional therapies and it's not working with you, come join the course. Go to bingebreakers.com/recovery-course.